She stood beneath the glittering cascade of crystal, a heavy envelope clutched in her hand. Her gaze swept over the hushed ballroom, her voice, though soft, cutting through the refined murmur. "I am not your silent beneficiary," she declared, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. "I am the truth you buried." The room froze, a collective, indrawn breath. This wasn't the expected speech. This wasn't the grateful young woman they remembered, the success story they paraded. Tonight, Serafina wasn't performing. She was delivering a verdict. Before we dive into this unforgettable night, tell us, where are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We read every single one, and if stories of unseen strength and profound truths speak to you, don't forget to subscribe. We're building a space for stories that demand to be heard. Stories like hers. Stay with us until the end, because sometimes the people you tried to erase, they are the ones who finish your story. The Thorn Philanthropy Gala shimmered beneath 1,000 tiny lights. Laughter rippled like expensive silk, smooth, curated, rehearsed. This was old money territory, generations of curated power wrapped in grand gestures and bespoke suits. The Thorns weren't just wealthy, they were legacy, rich. The kind of family whose name opened Ivy League doors before grades ever did. Serafina stepped through the arched entry of the grand Los Angeles venue, the soft click of her heels muffled by the plush velvet carpet. She paused just inside the ballroom, her presence barely noticed, deliberately unnoticed. Everything smelled of old money and carefully managed legacy. Perfume too cloying, tuxedos too crisp, smiles too fixed. The portraits greeted her first. Massive oil paintings lined the foyer, Mr. Elias Thorne and Eleanor Thorne in every frame, their sons, Julian and Leo, beaming beside them, a golden retriever. A summer in Monaco. 4th of July on the sprawling front lawn, red, white, and perfection. She wasn't in a single one. Of course not. A thin line formed at her jaw, but she walked forward, posture straight, spine still. People turned. Not many, but just enough. A woman in emeralds whispered behind her hand. A man in a tailored suit blinked twice, recognition dawning, then quickly looked away. They remembered her. They just didn't know what to do with her. At the far end of the ballroom stood the centerpiece, a mahogany podium, a golden plaque reading 50 Years of Impact, the Thorn Foundation Gala. Behind it, a banner honored Those We've Lifted. Serafina exhaled, a soft sound more controlled than breath. She scanned the room. Leo, the younger son, was deep in conversation with a tech magnate. His eyes flicked past her without stopping. Julian was further down, surrounded by campaign donors and university board members. Still golden-haired, still charming, still pretending not to see her. And at the center table, where only family sat, was Eleanor Thorne, still regal, still cold, still calling her sweet girl, like it was a name tag and not a dismissal. Serafina's chair was near the back, on a table marked special guests, between a junior councilman's intern and someone's assistant. Close enough to be included, far enough to be invisible. She took her seat without a word. A waiter came by, white gloves, silent service. She asked for water, no lemon. He brought sparkling water with lime, of course. On stage, the orchestra played a slow jazz rendition of What a Wonderful World. It didn't sound wonderful, it sounded curated. A voice clicked on the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? We are honored tonight to celebrate the legacy of the Thorn Foundation and the lives changed by its vision. One of those lives is with us this evening." Serafina didn't move. Her heart didn't race. Not anymore. It had learned not to. Please welcome Miss Serafina Jones, the Foundation's very first scholar, a living symbol of what hope, opportunity, and education can achieve. Polite applause, evenly spaced. She stood, not by choice, but by spotlight. Eyes pinned her like insects in a museum, admiration tinged with something colder. She nodded once, slightly, then sat again. Nothing more was expected of her, just presence, just proof. The applause faded. The speech continued. Serafina picked up her water, took a sip. Bitter. Across the room, Julian finally met her eyes, just for a second. Just long enough to remember. He looked away first. The slideshow began. Images flickered onto a screen, photos of groundbreaking ceremonies, smiling beneficiaries, ribbon cuttings with famous politicians. And there, buried in the middle of it, a single image, a young girl, maybe 10, in an oversized blazer holding a certificate. Her smile was small, eyes too old. That was her. That was all she got. She leaned back in her chair, let the shadows hold her. She thought of the annex room, the one with the window that never quite latched, the mattress with plastic underneath. The closet filled with old Thorn coats. They called it her room, but she never called it home. Eleanor had once said, "We wanted you to feel included." And she had smiled, grateful, because that's what you did when you were sponsored. You smiled. You stayed quiet. You posed for the photos but never framed them yourself. A new speaker took the stage. It was Leo, nervous but polished. He spoke of legacy, of generosity, of family. Serafina listened, not to the words, but to the tone, pride. Pride in something that didn't belong to her, that never had. When he said we, he meant them. Never her. Never the girl in the oversized blazer. Never the woman who built her future from scraps of false affection and performative kindness. She folded her hands in her lap. They were steady because she knew something they didn't. Something folded in her purse, waiting, heavy with ink and memory. Tonight, they celebrated their story. They just didn't know who would finish it. The annex room was at the far end of the hall, past the linen closet, past the second staircase, and always past the real rooms, the ones with names on the doors and birthday banners taped to the walls. Serafina never had a banner. She was 9 the first time she stepped inside. The air was dry, faintly dusty, like the room hadn't been used in years. The bed was low, the mattress stiff, wrapped in a plastic sheet that crackled under her weight. There was a lamp with no bulb, a clock that blinked noon endlessly, and a small window with a broken latch that whistled in the wind at night. She had no desk, no pictures, no dresser with her name carved on the back, just a cardboard box with her clothes, a cracked teddy bear, and a borrowed identity. Eleanor Thorn had shown her in, smiling like she'd done something noble. "It's not much," she'd said. "But it's safe." Then she closed the door, and Serafina sat there, hands still folded in her lap, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid to belong too much. Down the hall, laughter spilled from Julian's room. He had a bunk bed, even though he didn't share it. Glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, trophies from tennis and debate and sailing. He had space for dreams. She had silence. The first week, she called Eleanor Mr. Thorn. By week 2, Eleanor corrected her. "Just call me Eleanor, dear. We want you to feel part of the family." But it was a family with rules, quiet ones, unspoken, sharp as glass. At dinner, she sat near the edge of the table, not quite next to anyone, close enough for the photo, far enough to be cropped. The napkins were cloth, the silverware heavy. The conversations rehearsed. Leo was accepted into Princeton, someone would say. Julian's summer internship at the Senate was such a success. And then, silence until someone turned to her with a tight smile and asked, "So, how's school?" As if the question itself was charity. She learned to smile back, briefly, thankfully, just enough to show she appreciated the meal, the roof, the education, everything she was told she'd been given. But the thanks never stopped being expected, like rent paid in humility. At night, in the annex room, she read under the sheets with a flashlight. Her mother had taught her that before the accident, before the news came in a white envelope with no return address. Before Eleanor and Mr. Elias Thorn arrived at the group home with their smiles and their paperwork and their promises, Serafina remembered the look in her caseworker's eyes. Relief. As if Serafina had won something. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like being moved from one shelf to another. Sometimes, Julian would sneak into the annex room when he couldn't sleep, sit on the edge of her bed and whisper about how bored he was with piano lessons or how he hated French homework. He called her Rena. He made her laugh. She held on to that, like oxygen, until the day someone saw them, just sitting, just talking, and suddenly, she wasn't a scholar anymore. She was a risk, a distraction, a cautionary tale. Julian stopped coming after that. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He just stopped. Eleanor became colder. The compliments sharper, the hugs tighter, but shorter. "Don't forget where you came from, sweetheart," she whispered once, touching Serafina's cheek with a manicured finger. And Serafina understood. She wasn't there to grow. She was there to be grateful. In 9th grade, there was a family photo day. A professional photographer came to the estate. Everyone wore coordinated blues and whites. Serafina was given a cream sweater. It was 2 sizes too big. She stood between Julian and Leo, unsure where to put her hands. When the photo was printed weeks later, it hung in the front hallway. She wasn't in it. When she asked Eleanor why, the woman smiled gently. "It just didn't come out right, darling. Next year we'll do another." They never did. By 15, Serafina stopped asking for rides to school events. She walked when she could, caught buses, learned how to stitch her uniform when it ripped. When the school counselor praised her essay in front of Eleanor, saying it was good enough for a national prize, Eleanor tilted her head and said, "Yes." She's always been so motivated, as if effort was compensation for origin. At 16, Serafina made it to the state debate finals. She came home with a ribbon and a tired smile. No one was waiting up, so she taped the ribbon to the annex room mirror. The next morning, it was gone, folded and placed in her dresser drawer. "Don't clutter the glass," Eleanor said. "It's not your space to decorate." By 17, Serafina knew the rules too well. She cleaned up her tears. She ironed her clothes. She kept her trophies in a shoebox under the bed. When the acceptance letter to Stanford came, she read it alone on the porch swing. No one clapped. No one hugged her. Eleanor just nodded and said, "Well done, dear. We're very proud. You'll make us look good." That was the last straw, disguised as praise. She left 3 weeks later. No goodbye dinner, no framed photo, just a check written out to her tuition with "Don't waste it" scribbled in the memo, and a cold hug, the kind that breaks ribs from the inside. She took the check, her shoebox of ribbons, and left the annex room key on the counter. No one called after her. No one ever came to visit. She was the girl in the annex room, not family, just furniture, until tonight. Success, they said, was her redemption, her reward, proof that everything had been worth it. They wore her like a medal. The Thorns never forgot to mention her name at fundraisers. Our first scholar, Mr. Elias Thorne, would beam, drink in hand, arm around a senator. Eleanor would smile beside him, lips tight, eyes flicking sideways toward Serafina, like she was a plaque on the wall. There, polished, silent. She was invited to speak at their galas. Not too often, just enough. She knew the script by heart: gratitude, opportunity, resilience, the carefully packaged story of a girl who came from nothing and was given everything. What she was never allowed to say was that everything came with conditions, invisible ones, that the cost of their praise was her silence. Stanford was hard. Not the classes, the pretending that she hadn't been shaped by sharp looks and sharper silences. Pretending she didn't know how quickly approval could vanish if she stopped performing. She studied harder than anyone, graduated early, magna cum laude, wrote op-eds that got published, landed a prestigious fellowship. They called her inspiring. But when she spoke at panels, the introductions always included the same phrase, raised by the Thorne Foundation, like a label stitched into her skin. Serafina never corrected them, not once. Because the moment she did, she knew what would happen. The funding would slow, the doors would close, the warmth would turn to frost. So she smiled, she shook hands. She said, "Thank you," and it worked, until Julian came back. It was during her second year of law school. She was interning at a nonprofit running a clinic on housing rights. She hadn't seen him in years. But there he was, at a conference on social equity, standing at the coffee table with his perfect suit and easy grin. "Rena," he said, like no time had passed. She didn't move. He stepped closer. "You look incredible." She didn't reply. He laughed softly, awkwardly. "Still mad at me?" She stared at him. Not mad, just tired. Tired of ghosts arriving dressed as memories. He didn't apologize. Not then, not later. But he asked her to dinner. She said yes. She didn't know why. Maybe she wanted to see if anything had changed. Maybe she wanted to believe he regretted letting go. They talked for hours, about childhood, about ambition, about guilt. He called her brilliant. Said he read every article she published. Said he was proud. And for a moment, just one, she let herself believe he meant it. 3 weeks later, they were walking near campus, holding coffee, laughing. A woman from his father's foundation committee passed by. She waved. He waved back. "This is," the woman asked, already guessing, and he hesitated, just a beat too long. Then he said, "A friend from school. Not the girl I grew up with, not the person who changed me, not even Serafina. Just a friend." She smiled politely, a brittle smile that never reached her eyes. She never called him again. When she didn't return his messages, he left a voicemail. "I panicked, okay? It was politics. You know how it is." Yes, she knew exactly how it was. It was politics when they erased her from the photo. It was politics when Eleanor removed her name from the Christmas card list. It was always politics when the truth got inconvenient. So, she buried him, too. Buried the version of herself that still wanted to be wanted. By the time she graduated, the thorns were back in her inbox. Would she speak at the Foundation's 50th? Just a few words, just 5 minutes, just enough to remind people that they were the kind of family who changed lives. Serafina stared at the email for a long time. She almost deleted it. But something in her stopped. Because maybe, just maybe, this time, she wouldn't read the script. She flew back to Los Angeles the week before the gala, stayed in a small Airbnb far from the estate. She didn't visit the house, didn't drive by. But she walked past the school where Mr. Elias Thorne first gave that speech, where he called her a shining example of how compassion builds a legacy. She sat on the same bench where she used to eat lunch alone, watched kids rush by in uniforms too tight and shoes too clean. She thought of her mother, thought of the sound her voice made when she laughed, deep and warm. Thought of how she used to brush Serafina's hair with gentle hands, humming songs from the radio. No one ever asked about her mother at the Foundation. It didn't fit the narrative, because gratitude worked better when you erased where someone came from. Serafina returned to her rented room and pulled out a small box from her bag. Inside was every article, every photo, every mention with her name in it. In none of them did the Thornes call her family. Just their first success, their proof, their investment. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at the window watching rain streak down the glass and whispered aloud. What did it cost? Everything. Her voice, her truth, her place. But not anymore. Because tomorrow, she would walk into that gala, not as a symbol, not as a footnote, but as a woman who had paid for her success in silence and was finally ready to speak. The call came just 2 days before the gala. It was past midnight. Serafina had just finished reviewing her talking points, not for the speech she planned to give, but for the one they expected her to deliver, polished, safe, contained. Her phone buzzed against the nightstand. Unknown number. She let it ring. Then it rang again, the same number. She answered. The voice on the other end was gravelly, slow, and familiar. Miss Serafina, it's Bernard. She froze. Bernard. The Thornes housekeeper turned gardener, the only person who ever whispered, You okay? When no one was looking, the only one who never smiled at her, but smiled with her. I need you to come by the estate, he said. She didn't ask why. The next morning, fog hung over the hills like a warning. The Thorne mansion sat at the top of a winding drive, grand and silent. The white columns stood proud, defiant, but the shutters were peeled, the paint fading. The lawn, once sculpted to perfection, was now just grass. Time didn't respect legacy. Bernard met her at the side door. Same cap, same limp. Older now, skin folded like pages left in the rain, but his eyes still sharp. I don't have much time, he said. Neither do you. She followed him down the back hallway, past the breakfast nook no one used, past the parlor where Eleanor used to host strategy teas, fake social events with real agendas. They stopped in the main study, Mr. Thorne's study. She hadn't set foot in it in over a decade. It smelled of leather, pipe, tobacco, and dust-covered silence. On the wall hung a familiar frame, an oil portrait of the family posed in the rose garden, Julian front and center, Eleanor's pearl necklace catching sunlight. Mr. Thorne's hand on Leo's shoulder. She wasn't in it, but she had stood behind the camera that day. "You see this frame?" Bernard said, tapping the corner. "It's a shadow box, double-lined. Most people don't notice." He pulled a pen from his shirt pocket, slid it under the edge. The frame popped loose with a soft click. Inside, taped to the back, was an envelope, yellowed, sealed, faint cursive on the front. Serafina. Her breath caught in her chest. "Mr. Thorne gave it to me a week before the stroke," Bernard said. "Said if anything ever happened, it was for your hands only." Serafina stared at the envelope. It was real. Not a rumor, not a theory. Her name in Mr. Thorne's handwriting. She took it slowly, like it might crumble. Her fingers trembled. Her voice didn't. Did he say what it was? Bernard nodded once. He said it was the truth, and that he was sorry. She didn't open it there. She thanked him, hugged him tight, and left through the side gate, unnoticed by the cameras that no longer worked. Back at her apartment, she sat at the window. The city buzzed beneath her, unaware, unconcerned. She ran her fingers over the edge of the flap. She opened it. The paper inside was thick, heavy, handwritten in deep blue ink. It began simply, "My dearest Serafina, if you're reading this, then I have failed twice. Once by silence, and again by not finding the courage to face you." She blinked hard. "I was a coward. I let the world dictate what I should be proud of. I let fear write the script. And in doing so, I wrote you out. You were not just a girl we helped. You were not our project. You were my daughter." The words cracked something inside her. She read on. "You were born of a love I was too weak to claim publicly. Your mother, she was brilliant, fierce. And I was ashamed of how little I fought for either of you. When she passed, I thought I was doing the right thing by bringing you into our home, but the terms weren't love, they were control. I see that now. Eleanor told me we needed to keep it quiet, that it would damage the foundation's image, that it would be enough to give you a name and an education. But you deserved more than a name. You deserved a father, and I didn't give you one." Tears blurred the ink. She wiped them fast. She needed to see. "I wrote you out of speeches. I let them photograph around you. I let them treat you like proof of their goodness instead of proof of my blood. I'm sorry. I know I can't fix what I broke, but I can leave you something. Not money, not attention, but truth. You belong to this family, whether they like it or not. And for what it's worth, if I could do one thing right, it would have been this. Loving you out loud. Dad." She folded the letter once, twice. Her hand steadied. Everything inside her that had screamed for years finally heard. Not by applause, not by acknowledgement, but by truth. The kind too heavy to carry, the kind too sacred to bury. Tomorrow, she would walk into their celebration with this letter in her purse. Not for revenge, but for remembrance. Not to embarrass them, but to unerase herself. They wanted her in the background. She would not oblige. The ballroom lights dimmed as the host returned to the podium. His voice echoed over clinking glasses and soft jazz. "And now, to close this beautiful evening, we invite to the stage someone who has always embodied what the Thorne Foundation stands for. Our very first scholar, Miss Serafina Jones." Polite applause scattered like forced rain. Practiced. Predictable. Serafina stood slowly. Her chair didn't scrape. Her steps didn't rush. The hem of her black dress brushed the polished floor like ink spilling across glass. Each stride was deliberate, calm, but inside, a storm pounded against her ribcage. She passed table after table, faces turned, curious. Eleanor's lips tightened. Leo shifted in his seat. Julian didn't move at all, not even his eyes. She climbed the stairs to the stage. No one offered a hand. No one expected her to need one. She stood behind the podium. A single spotlight burned down. Her silhouette cut clean against the gold and blue thorn banner that waved behind her like a flag she never swore allegiance to. She didn't smile. She didn't clear her throat. She simply looked at them. All of them. The donors, the dignitaries, the family, and the lie. She placed both hands on the podium, Still steady, still hers. Her voice, when it came, was soft. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted every ear in the room to lean in. "Good evening," she said, "and thank you for inviting me." No one moved. A breathless hush blanketed the crowd. Serafina paused. She scanned the sea of tailored suits and sequined dresses. She saw legacy manufactured and polished. She saw power built on curated stories and controlled silence. And then she saw Bernard standing in the very back, hat in hand. She gave him the smallest nod. Then she opened her purse, slowly. No one blinked. From inside, she pulled a folded envelope. The same pale yellow, the same faded blue ink. She held it up, not high, not dramatic, just enough for those who knew to recognize it. Enough for those who feared it to freeze. "I found this letter last week," she said. "I wasn't looking for it. It found me." The room didn't breathe. She unfolded the paper with care, like it might vanish if handled too roughly. "It's from Mr. Elias Thorne, written in his hand, and it begins like this." She read, "My dearest Serafina, if you're reading this, then I have failed twice." A gasp escaped someone near the front. A fork clattered. A waiter stilled mid-pour. Serafina didn't stop. She read every word, every apology, every confession, every truth they had worked so hard to bury. She didn't stumble, didn't tremble. Her voice grew, not louder, but deeper, more rooted, more real. By the time she reached the final lines, "You were not our project. You were my daughter," there was no more pretending. The silence cracked. A woman covered her mouth. Julian's hand clenched the edge of the table. Eleanor's face had gone white, but Serafina wasn't watching them. She was seeing her mother, her real mother, in a sun-warmed kitchen, singing to the radio, brushing her daughter's hair with gentle hands, not because of the image, but because of love. She folded the letter once more, held it, then spoke, not as a scholar, not as a symbol, but as herself. "I was raised in a house that gave me everything but acknowledgement. I was praised publicly, but never embraced privately. They called me a success, but only when I was silent." She paused, let the weight settle. "They told a story where I was lucky to be here, but they never admitted that I belonged here. And now, for the first time, I speak not as a guest," her eyes locked on Eleanor's, "but as a thorn." The name echoed like thunder in a marble tomb. She stepped back from the podium, not dramatically. "Just enough. I don't read this for revenge," she said. "I read this because stories can't heal if they stay buried, and because little girls in annex rooms deserve to be remembered." No one clapped. Not yet. No one moved. They weren't ready. The applause would come later. Too late. Too polite. But now they had to sit in it. The discomfort, the shame, the truth. Serafina turned, walked down the stairs. Her heels didn't falter. Her head didn't bow. She passed Julian, his lips parted, but no sound came. She passed Eleanor, still rigid, cracked porcelain, and she kept walking because the letter was read. The silence was broken. And the room was hers now. The air in the ballroom didn't move. It hung thick, stunned, breathless. Serafina walked back to her seat through a tunnel of silence. Eyes followed her, wide and unblinking. Forks frozen mid-air. Napkins crumpled in fists. Champagne left untouched. She passed donors who had praised her, men who once called her the face of hope, women who smiled too wide when cameras were near. Now their expressions crumbled like delicate glass under pressure. No one dared speak. At the family table, Eleanor sat like a statue, still upright, still composed. But her eyes had changed, cold before, now unreadable. She clutched her wineglass with both hands, knuckles white, lips tight. The hand that once guided Serafina away from family portraits now gripped the past like a weapon. Leo avoided looking at anyone, his gaze fixed on the centerpiece, hydrangeas, white, fragile. Julian stared at the floor, as if the letter had snapped a thread inside him. Serafina didn't care. She didn't sit back down. She didn't need to. The room was no longer theirs to host. She paused near the back, beside a marble pillar dusted with gold trim. Just enough shadow to rest in. just enough light to still be seen. Bernard met her eyes from across the room. He nodded. Once. That was enough. The MC returned to the stage, voice shaking. We'd like to thank Miss Jones for her moving tribute. A few claps trickled, sparse, uncertain, then stopped. No one knew how to move on. The program stuttered through its final moments. A closing toast, a mention of sponsors, background jazz swelled again, awkward and misaligned. But Serafina wasn't listening. She watched the room shift slowly, painfully. Conversations restarted, low and strained. Some guests gathered their coats early, avoiding eye contact as they slipped out. Others approached Eleanor with cautious glances, as if her reaction would dictate their own. No one came to her. Not yet. And still, she felt no shame. Only breath. For the first time in 20 years, she could breathe. Outside the ballroom doors, city traffic hummed. Lights from town cars blinked in the valet line. Somewhere, a reporter whispered into a phone. Somewhere, a board member began drafting their exit strategy. But inside, a legacy had cracked, and truth poured through like floodlight. Serafina turned from the pillar, walked, not rushed, not timid. She moved like someone who had walked this hallway 100 times, but never like this. At the base of the staircase, Eleanor stood, blocking her path, face unreadable, mouth tight. She opened it, paused, then simply said, "You could have handled that privately." Serafina didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't fold. "I did," she said. "For 20 years." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "We gave you a future." Serafina met her gaze, unwavering. "No, I built it. You gave me rules. I broke them. That's what made me free." They stood like statues, two women on opposite ends of a history written in ink and silence. Eleanor stepped aside, not with grace and dismay, but with defeat, and Serafina walked past. As she reached the exit, Julian called out, softly, hesitantly, "Rena." She stopped, didn't turn, just waited. He stepped forward. His voice was quieter than she remembered. "I didn't know." Serafina turned finally, her eyes locked with his. "You didn't ask, and that was the truth." He never asked what it was like to be left out of photos, to be the girl with no nameplate, to be his almost, his secret, his silence. She held his stare for a moment longer, then turned again, walked through the doors. Outside, the city felt different, the air clearer, the night softer. She crossed the stone steps, heels clicking like punctuation marks. Not angry, not triumphant, just free. At the curb, the driver opened the door, but before she stepped in, she turned back, looked up at the building she once thought of as a fortress. Now, just bricks, just windows, just a house. Not a home. She didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel temporary. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to prove she belonged. She just did. And that truth, unshakable, was hers alone. As the car pulled away, Serafina didn't look back again. There was no need. They had heard her, they had seen her, and whether they liked it or not, she belonged here. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt invisible in a place you were told to call home? Share your experience in the comments. We read everyone. Thank you for watching and walking this journey with us. If you found strength in Serafina's voice, consider subscribing for more stories that speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Until next time, stay bold, stay seen, and never let anyone write you out of your own story.